Hello everyone, you're watching sqadia.com and we are discussing the avascular atraumatic causes of avascular necrosis or osteonecrosis. We will be briefly discussing some of those causes which lead to osteonecrosis and are not associated with trauma, such as sickle cell disease. We'll be discussing in this section the epidemiology, causes and its clinical features, what are sickle cell disease, what is sickle cell trait, what are sickle cell crises, and how do we manage those children with sickle cell disease, especially if they present with recurrent bone infarcts. So, coming to what are some of the causes which actually are not related to trauma? They may be drug induced. For example, the drug induced causes of or non traumatic causes of AVN include alcohol. Why alcohol causes AVN? Because there's a lot of highly free charged radicals are actually released in the blood, which eventually cause AVN. Then steroids. Steroids also have a very high role in because they are really catabolic to bone and it results in avascular necrosis. Then there are immunosuppressives, such as especially those patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. In them, there is always a very high chance of osteonecrosis of the femoral head. Lastly, it's the cytotoxic drugs as well. Because if the patient who has undergone grafting, for example, they have undergone liver transplant or kidney transplant, post-operatively they have to be given certain drugs which actually suppress their immunity so that they cannot show a host-host graft reaction. This may result in because of excessive steroids are usually given these surgically, which may eventually cause AVN or osteonecrosis. What is actually a sickle cell disease? A genetic disorder in which the red blood cells contain abnormal hemoglobin called as HbS. What actually happens is that at normal oxygen tension, these blood RBCs are very similar to the normal RBCs. But what happens is when the oxygen tension reduces, for example, when the environment gets hypoxic, they assume a sickling shape. And this is especially true when they are entering into small arterioles or in the periphery of the body, where there is definitely low amount of oxygen present and there is high amount of carbon dioxide and the environment is relatively hypoxic. Therefore, at that point, when the maximum amount of oxygen carrying capacity is needed, they assume that sickle shape so that they are unable to carry normal oxygen towards those peripheral areas, leading to infarction. Epidemiology. Sickle cell trait originated in West and Central Africa. It was centuries ago. Natural selection for survival in areas where malaria was endemic. Somehow it's noted that those people who have the sickle cell trait are actually immune to malaria, because as you know that malaria actually it's replicates and grows inside the RBCs. But where there which have HbS hemoglobin, usually the malarial parasites cannot gametocytes and all they cannot grow inside these RBCs. So it was kind of a natural mechanism by which they were protected from malaria. This gene was actually carried out to countries along the Mediterranean, then the Persian Gulf, parts of India, and across the Atlantic, where it appears in the people of African American descent as well. In recent years, it has spread more widely in Europe, but is rarely encountered in the south of equator. If you see this map, this is the main area. This is around the South American north part of those Brazil and mainly African continent. From there's some parts of Mediterranean also affected to some degree these areas as well. And then there is endemic areas of these. This may all be affected as well, but rarely in the far corners of the world. For example, the north side or the south side, they really get affected from the sickle cell disease. So what actually happens? What's kind of a problem with the sickle cell disease? It's most likely is homozygous offspring. What happens is if there are two alleles for that gene, there's a dominant allele and there's a recessive allele. Only and only the child would get affected if it contains the two recessive alleles. For example, if you see this chart, there is an unaffected carrier father, which actually contains one dominant and one recessive gene. Similarly, unaffected carrier mother, which is although carrying a small allele as capital R and small r, but it's not affected because the dominant one is there usually the patient is not affected. Only and only if these two small r will combine, this would result in phenotypic expression of the disease leading to sickle cell disease. This is how they can eventually, what happens is there's always a 1 in 4 chance, almost the 1 in 4 chance that there's this will have two dominant R's, which means that this child will neither be a carrier nor will be affected. That these two offsprings will contain the same like kind of genotype like father and mother, capital R and small r, which means there will be carrier, and there is always a chance that someone among their offsprings may get this kind of disease. But although they are not affected, but this child which has really small r and small r, which contains both the alleles which are actually recessive, they usually are the ones who are affected, and the phenotypic expression of this disease is actually manifested in these children. It also occurs in heterozygous children with HPS-C and hemoglobinopathy or HPS thalassemia, but this is very, very rare. So what actually happens is how this genes and alleles actually code for it, and what changes actually do happen. If you see it, this is a normal DNA. These are the pyrimidines and pyridoxines and GAG, guanine, adenosine, and guanine. This is actually coding for some kind of a protein. Once it's coded, it becomes glutamine. If this is normally glutamine is synthesized, but only instead of adenosine, there is thiamine, which is actually changed. Once GTG, which actually codes for valine, and once valine is actually inserted into this, the whole 3D structure of the hemoglobin is actually changed from normal hemoglobin to HbS hemoglobin. Now, what would this result in? That once the oxygen tension is low, this would result in sickling or collapse of this structure of the hemoglobin, leading to sickle cell shape of the RBCs. This is the diagram. If you can appreciate over here, this is containing a normal endothelium. This is an almost no. These are some of the cells are normal, but other have assumed sickle cell shape. And why they have assumed the sickle cell shape? Because probably this is the area where there are small arterioles. There's low oxygen tension, leading to sickling of the RBCs. But once they assume the sickling, they can clog up small arterioles, leading to down the signs infarction of the area which is actually being supplied with the small part of the arteriole. Coming to the clinical features, it's actually called as a hand and feet syndrome in most children. And why? Because the hand and feet swelling is the most commonly which is affected, but other parts are also affected as well. For example, there's always a bossing of the forehead. And why this bossing of the forehead occurs? Because normally the marrow is actually hyperactive and is producing more number of RBCs, because although these RBCs are present but they are defective and cannot perform and maintain a normal function. So actually marrow is multiplying fast and producing more and more hematopoietic tissue. As a result, there is hypertrophy of marrow leading to bossing of forehead. As a result, when you see it from the side, there is definitely enlargement and protrusion of the forehead in these children. Then there is anemia and jaundice. Why still anemic? Because although there is number of RBCs has increased, but they are defective. They are not normal. As a result, the normal number of amount of RBCs are still very low, leading to anemic pattern. And those which are sickle cell RBCs, which actually are defective and become sickle shape under low O2, what results is they are actually broken down, and which leads to formation of jaundice, because a lot of bilirubin is actually released into the bloodstream. Now, then there are other hematopoietic organs as well, such as spleen and liver, and there is always massive hepatomegaly and splenomegaly, because they have to function at a much higher rate than a normal children, because a lot of hematopoiesis has to occur so that more and more RBCs needs to be synthesized. Then it's the bone pain. And why bone pains actually occur? Because of infarction. Very simple. It's ischemic pain. There is small arterioles which are actually clogged up by these sickle type RBCs. They get blocked, which is leading to ischemic necrosis of the area which has been drained by that small arteriole. And especially this happens in bone, it leads to severe bone pain. Severe bone pain along with fever is a classical sign of a sickle cell crisis, because when there is high amount of fever, there is a lot of breakage of RBCs. This lead to severe type of anemia, shortness of breath, and due to severe thrombosis of the small arterioles, leading to ischemia and bone pains, which is specifically, there's a term for it called as sickle cell crisis. Usually the children are shorter than their peers, and sickle cell crisis, it may extend up to from hours to week long, and there may be pain, swelling in chest, abdomen, and hand and feet. In all those areas, why are these areas involved? Mainly because these are the areas involved in the hematopoiesis. But hands and feet are actually affected most because they're lying in the periphery. Osteonecrosis of femoral head, both in children and young adults, may be a feature of sickle cell disease, in whom other causes of non-traumatic osteonecrosis have been excluded. Males and females are affected with almost equal frequency. Children develop a painful limp and movements are usually restricted. Now, if you see, this is a kind of a picture, a lot of sclerotic element is there. There's some degree of sclerosis over here, specifically over here. There's reduced marked joint space. If you see, this is a forearm of the same child, probably there's a lot of sclerosis over here, this lucencies. Then excessive sclerosis, there's a lot of margin of the bone is not clear, irregular margins. And if you see the spine over here, the vertebra, there's a lot of gap in these two vertebrae, and these two vertebrae are almost enclosed because joining them together. This is the kind of a picture which is usually either a lot of sclerosis is due to the lot of infarction which has gone on. All that area which is becoming dead is actually becoming sclerosed and would appear white on the x-rays. Due to there's a massive infarction of the bone, this results in AVN of the certain area, such as AVN of the femoral head. It could be the vertebra, it could be any long bone, any part of the long bone, or anything like that. So coming to the treatment, the hypoxic conditions should be avoided. Why they should be avoided? Because if there will be low O2 and the hypoxia, that will lead to increased sickling, that will lead to increased thrombosis and further bone pain and bone infarction. So it's going to actually enter into a vicious cycle. The transfusion may be necessary. Why? Because although they have a lot of number of RBCs, but they're all defective. So actually the carrying capacity of the blood is very limited. So they may have to be transfused so that their relative hypoxia can be relieved. During crisis, patients should be given adequate analgesia and should be kept fully oxygenated, because crisis develop out of hypoxia that leads to fever, specific bone pain, and that which is bone pain is mainly infarction. As a result, painkillers can be given to relieve of pain, and the root cause of that in sickle cell crisis is actually hypoxia. So, excess oxygen should be administered to those patients who are in sickle cell crisis. Infections should be guarded against and treated promptly with appropriate antibiotics. The commonest organism usually affecting in sickle cell disease is salmonella, and antibiotics should be given against the salmonella microorganisms. Thank you very much. Keep watching sqadia.com.